Hello, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Why is this England side so frustrating? That is what I'm going to get into in this video. In particular, a disconnect I think there is between the fans and this current England team. But before I get into it, I've been really appreciative of all the support I've had throughout the autumn. If you can help me creep up towards that 1,000 subscriber mark, I would really appreciate it. So if you're new here, hit the subscribe button, like the video, and drop a comment down below. What do you make of this England team? And do you agree with me that there's a disconnect between the fans and the England side? All right, let's get into it. So as I mentioned, I think that there is a big disconnect between this current England side and the fan base, and it's something that we haven't necessarily seen before. There were boos at full time of the South Africa game. Eddie Jones afterwards, when I asked him about it, said he didn't hear it. But I think there is an issue brewing between disenchanted a little bit with this side, and I think it's that Eddie Jones has constantly, over the last 3 or 4 years since the 2019 World Cup, saying it's all about the World Cup in France in 2023. And what that does is it surrenders the importance of the here and now. And people spend an awful lot of money to go and watch games at Twickenham. Once you've got the ticket prices, once you've considered how much they spend in terms of travel, hotels, beer, food, all that sort of thing, it's hundreds, maybe even thousands of pounds, depending on how many people they're going with. And if they're being told that these games don't really matter, the results of these games don't particularly matter, it's all about the World Cup, then I think it leads to that element of disenchantment with the squad that we're currently seeing at the moment. And I think that's backed up by some of what Eddie Jones has said as well. In his press conference after the South Africa defeat, he basically said he doesn't care what people think. And I understand to a degree, when you're in a high performance environment, there's so many voices in the media, there's so many voices on social media, on their opinions and everything like that. So to a degree, he has to have that kind of, I don't care what people think. But I think it's starting to filter through in a way which suggests, or people are at least feeling like he doesn't care what the England fans think when they are the people spending an awful lot of money to try and support the team at Twickenham. And the RFU statement, when they put the statement out following the defeat to South Africa in terms of this review that they're going to do, an anonymous panel and all that, could do a whole nother video on that and the fact that it's anonymous, but let's not get too distracted. But when the RFU put out their statement, it was a very pointed, very interesting that early on in that statement, they made the point of saying, we care what the fans think. And the players as well on a lot of their social channels in terms of their Instagram posts and things have said how much they appreciate the fans, because I think they are conscious, the RFU in particular is conscious of the fact that the fans are getting frustrated with Eddie Jones because he is giving the impression that he doesn't care what the fans think. He doesn't care if they're not happy with the team or how they're going. And I think that is a problem because it is resulting in the boos that we're seeing at the end of the South Africa game, for example. Also, if we just consider for a moment the whole, we're building for the World Cup. Of course, the World Cup, it's the biggest prize in the sport. It's always going to be a focus. But let's look at the women's game. Look at the Red Roses and what happened in the Women's World Cup. England come into that on the back of a 30-game winning streak, 6 Nations Grand Slams. They get a red card for a high tackle. They end up losing the game. That can happen. So if you're putting all your eggs in the World Cup basket, all it can take is one thing, one red card, a bad bit of officiating, and that whole 4-year cycle falls to pieces and comes to nothing. Whereas if you look at some of the other teams, let's say France or Ireland, for example, who are probably the 2 favourites for the World Cup at the moment. It could change, but for me, they're probably the 2 favourites. Let's say it happens to them and they mess up at the World Cup. They get a red card or whatever it may be and they got knocked out. They don't win it. They can still look back on the last few years and Ireland will have their first ever Test Series victory away to New Zealand to point to. France are going to have a 6 Nations Grand Slam. They're going to have so many other things that they can point towards as having a good 4 years. Whereas England at the moment, if they don't deliver at the World Cup, what can England fans realistically point towards? I don't think there's that much. So I think that is an issue, having that so solely your focus. Yes, you want to build towards a World Cup, but putting all your eggs in that basket is very dangerous. And I think the England fans are starting to get frustrated by that. But if you agree, if you disagree, do let me know what you think in the comments down below. Also, let's get onto the style of play with England. We've been promised this new attacking game plan. I can't remember the last time that England looked genuinely dangerous with ball in hand on a consistent basis. You probably have to go back to the 2019 World Cup. I think throughout this cycle, they've kicked the ball away a lot. They've tried to bring a real physicality, because that's where they were lacking in the 2019 World Cup final and where they got beat up by the Springboks. So they've been trying to play that way, and they haven't really developed their attacking game. Now, they have been promising it to us. Apparently what they're trying to do is have an attacking game which is a lot more fluid, a lot less structured, so you can strike from anywhere and people have different positions. It's almost a little bit like, if you think, Alex Lowe on the Ruck podcast for the Times actually made this point, in that it's kind of like Man City in football. It's almost that idea that shirt numbers don't matter. It's such a fluid system. Sounds great, right? But is that actually going to work in a game so structured as rugby, to not have that kind of attacking structure? And I don't think we've seen it so far, have we? We haven't seen it in the last few years. There's been brief moments in the autumn, the final 10 minutes against the Springboks. There were even a few breaks against South Africa. But on a consistent basis, England just haven't looked like cutting teams apart. And I think with the players at their disposal, they should be. They should at least be able to have more of an attacking threat. And we're not seeing it at the moment. So that's a massive, massive frustration for me. When is that going to kick in? Again, I could be proved completely wrong. Maybe by the time we get to the World Cup, it'll all be all right. But we can only go on what we've seen in recent times, and we haven't seen that attacking game. I'd love to see it kick into gear. As I say, I think there's been brief glimpses of it, but overall as a structure, it hasn't worked so far. So that's a massive, massive frustration for me. Then just the final point really is the overall lack of progress that we've seen. I mentioned 2019 was the last time we saw the attacking game really kick into gear. It's probably the last time we really saw England on a consistent basis be really, really good. They've been so stop-start. Their discipline has been really, really poor. Set piece has been good against some teams, and then, like we saw against the Springboks at the weekend, get absolutely dismantled at other times. Eddie Jones says that he is seeing progress. I asked him about it post-match. I was pitch side for radio, so we got the interview afterwards, and I asked him, is he progressing to the World Cup in the way that he wants to? And he said yes, that he is. But are we seeing that, really? I don't know what's that based upon. Maybe it's something that we can't see from the outside. But in all honesty, it's just incredibly frustrating because I don't know where that is currently coming from. I don't think anyone can look at what this England team are producing at the moment and be confident that it's all going to come together. Now, as I've said already, it might do. Eddie Jones is relying on the fact that he will get the players for 2 or 3 months in a training camp before the World Cup in France. It's often a frustration, particularly between England and Premiership clubs, how much access they get to players. And that is an issue, I think. So what Eddie Jones is relying on is that 3 months, and can he gel them into a team that can do something at the World Cup? And Eddie Jones is such an experienced coach. He has such a track record of doing it, that it may well all come together. But as I've already said in the video, I come back to the point of that is a massive, massive gamble, given that anything can happen at the World Cup. And as fans, as media, as commentators, we have to go on what we see in front of us and what we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years. And at the moment, there's so much frustration with England because they haven't built in the way that many of us would have hoped they would. Let me know in the comments down below what you make of all this. Do you think that England are going to be all right at the World Cup? But also importantly, do you think there's a disconnect between the fans at the moment? I think there is. I think it is an all-time high disconnect between the fans and the team. And I think it stems from the fact that they are so prioritising the World Cup that it almost feels like nothing else matters when people invest a huge amount to try and follow and support the team. Remember, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Nice one.